Cheers.
Cheers. You found it. Perfect name. Got the domain, you're ready to go.
Ooh, hold on. Just because you got the domain doesn't mean we're ready to go.
What do you mean?
Oh, so many people I talk to are like, hey, I found the domain name. Can you go ahead and register the trademark? And then we start looking into it and find out, nope, a little too common.
But I've got the domain. What else do I care about? Why do I care?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's talk about it today.
And drink to it.
And drink to it.
Welcome to Executive Pour.
Hey, what are we drinking on today, Karen?
So, last podcast, you reminded us all that you're from the South. Today, we're doing a nod to your Southern heritage. This is a Sazerac.
Ooh.
Native to predominantly New Orleans, I think, but it's a Sazerac rye. In New Orleans, they typically do it with a Peychaud's bitter, Dr. Peychaud's bitter. I think we went with the traditional absinthe today. Cheers.
Cheers. I will certainly drink to that. Plus, you didn't commit my faux pas and refer to it as New Orleans, so we can still be friends.
I know my limits. Well, some of them anyway.
Well, should we introduce ourselves?
Absolutely.
Well, I'm Shay Nelson. I'm a small business attorney trying to help make sure that things like protecting your branding is stuff that you don't have to worry about later.
I'm Karen Sullivan, founder of Sullivan Solutions and marketing from the C-suite, trying to keep your brand scalable and real.
Well, let's do it. So here's the tricky thing with trademarks. Everybody comes up with what they think is a cool idea that they think is incredibly unique. And then they say, hey, I want to file my trademark registration.
Sure. Which
is absolutely important if you're trying to build up a brand and you actually want to protect it. The problem is that trademark law is a bit of a mess. So the standard for trademarks is that one cannot be confusingly similar to another.
Okay.
So the example that I always give people, and I'm curious if you'll recognize this one, is you remember the movie Coming to America?
Oh, yeah.
McDowell's is confusingly similar to McDonald's for obvious reasons.
Absolutely.
So it doesn't matter that you did a search and nobody else has the exact same name or the exact same domain. The question is whether or not it's confusingly similar. Now, my pet peeve as the attorney is that trademarks are kind of graded on a scale.
All right.
So obviously, we start with generic words, right? Nobody can trademark generic words, right? If you come in and say, hey, best pizza, obviously you're not getting the trademark for that.
So pizza's being the generic term.
Yeah.
All right. I can see that.
So then after that, we have what the law calls descriptive trademarks. And these are the ones that kind of basically describe the product or service, right?
Best.
So best pizza, hot and ready pizza.
Well, that's not a problem because from a marketing standpoint, I'm going to tell you not to use these anyway. Those aren't good names. Those are boring. Those are generic. Those are not differentiators. Everybody says they've got the best pizza. It's highly subjective, as we find out every Friday night when we try to order pizza in this house. So, okay, I'm not going to get excited about trying to trademark best pizza. We're safe. Plus, I'm never going to get the domain. That's more an SEO term. You know, who thinks it's best pizza? How many people think it's that's what we'll relegate that to SEO.
Okay, fair enough. So then the one that most people come into my office with are what the law calls suggestive trademarks. They suggest something about the product or service, but they don't come right out and say it. So Microsoft is a classic example, right? It suggests something about the kind of software that they make and sell, but it doesn't come right out and say it.
Okay. All right. That I wouldn't have thought of that one as suggestive necessarily. But that's a good example. Okay. Go on.
The problem with those is that none of us are as creative as we think we are. And so the chances are, if that's your bright idea, there are probably other people that also had that or something very similar to it as their bright idea. And so these are the ones where I'll go to do the trademark search and you're saying, I've got the domain name, I registered my business name, And I go and look and I find 50 others that are very similar to that.
So how does Microsoft get away with it? Just by virtue of being the first one to grab it?
Pretty much. I mean, trademark rights are based on who was using it first.
All
And
right.
so for some of these older companies, those prominent examples, yeah, they kind of beat everybody else to it. But sitting here in 2026, have you really beat anybody to something that is suggestive?
Well, that's fair. But how hard are we really going to look? I mean, I see service vans going up and down the highway, passing me right and left every day. Affordable dentures, reliable plumbing, people are using these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And in some cases, you're using them because it's simple, it's easy to remember, customers recognize it. You're not necessarily worried about building up a brand that really differentiates you from everybody else. You want something quick, easy, and memorable.
Okay.
Right. But if I get affordable dentures and cheap dentures and, nice dentures all mixed up, do you really care?
Only if it's my dentures.
Fair enough.
Right.
Fair enough.
Oh, okay. So where are you going with this? Do I have any hope of
So the ones that work out best from a trademark standpoint are
Right.
the ones that they're not how normal people, like at least I think you and I think. The best trademarks are going to be what the law calls arbitrary or even fanciful. So this is when you take a word and you apply it to something that's totally different. So like Apple for computers and iPhones, right? Apples have nothing to do with computers. They built that connection in our mind.
never mind the fact that Apple went down the path of are they still paying the Beatles?
This one I didn't hear about.
Yeah, they were Apple Records.
Wow, I did not know that one. I'm
Apple's
gonna have to go look into this
Apple's not
story.
a good example now. They've done really, really, really well at covering that up and being amicable. But yeah,
I'm gonna have to go look into that one because I'm definitely curious about that.
or we can just get Paul McCartney on the show.
You work on that.
All right, I'll work on that one. Okay.
But the other example I'll give is what we call fanciful, right? We just completely make up a word, right? So Exxon is a completely made up word. We know what it means now because they've put in the effort to build up that recognition, right? And that's what so many small business owners don't want to do. They want to start with something that immediately makes sense instead of building up the brand.
Well, no argue from me on that because I'm going to argue all about the brand and that's not an issue, but it is an issue when you can't find something to represent your brand. And I don't know. Exxon is I can't comment on whether that's legit or not, but I do know we're an increasingly global society. How do you know that just because it means absolutely nothing in the States that you're safe when you do make that 1 or 100th sale, or if you start selling from Amazon, now you're in a global economy. And I will, my go-to example on that one is, well, if you didn't remember the Apple thing, you're probably not old enough to remember a Chevy Nova either. But
I've definitely heard of it.
Okay, so we've heard of a Chevy
Slight
Nova.
age difference here, but we won't talk about that.
That's an infamous example where Chevy came up with Nova as the perfect name for this new car they were launching, and they did all of the search, they did all the right things, they were able to, well, I assume they trademarked it, didn't care about those things way back then. I only cared that it was a Chevy, not a Ford. But so then they're a global company. Somewhere along the line, they discovered that Nova, while it means absolutely nothing in English, so we're safe with that part of the world. However, I believe it's Spanish. It means no go.
Wow.
Makes it really hard to sell a car that way. So with what you're telling me, I got a lot of research to do before I try and trademark something.
True, true. And a lot of this depends on, what kind of brand are you trying to build? What's your target market? Do you plan to go global or international, right? Or are you a small business that's trying to, build something more regional or national, right?
So these sound like a lot of questions I ask my customers from a marketing standpoint when they want to start representing their brand, building it out, putting words around it, putting visuals around it. But I'm certainly not equipped to tell them about doing all the research. What are the pitfalls there? How do we work this out?
So here's the pitfall. You come up with the brand, you and your marketing person, you come up with the brand you absolutely love, and you start to build it up. And then later on down the road, you either get that nasty cease and desist letter because lo and behold, your brand looks confusingly similar to someone else's, right? Or you build it up, and you're like, hey, this has been awesome. I'm ready to go and, take this on the road, go national. I want to franchise my business. And you're like, all right, we got to get this trademark registration done. And we can't because of all these other registrations that have beaten you to it. So I give you a classic example, and I can share this just because it's all public record at this point. But I once had a situation where a client came in from a trade show. And like most trade shows, they're sitting at their booth. There's a competitor sitting next to them at their booth. And lo and behold, the labels on their products look awfully similar. Except competitor sits over here and goes, well, I have my trademark registration certificate. So the client goes, well, what do? We've spent like $20,000 labeling all these products. Yeah, you're going to lose that fight.
Wow.
So it's a catch-22, and I recognize that, right? Because there's so many expenses when you're starting up a business. Spending more money with the lawyers is probably not on everybody's top of their to-do list. I will be the first person to tell people when they're starting a business, I don't care what kind of business you're starting, congratulations, your new job is marketing. That's what you're going to spend the vast majority of your time doing.
You're not wrong.
But if you're putting in all that marketing effort only to find out that your competitor's now mad at you because their branding is very similar, or you've built up the recognition, but now we can't get the trademark registration because a dozen other people have already registered something similar. And now we're sitting here going, great, do we start all over?
Well, it kind of sounds like if I'm starting a business, I got to be a lawyer too.
Or better yet, actually hire a lawyer. If I hear one more ChatGPT horror story, goodness.
Well, that'd be my next question. How much can we rely on if these things are registered, are they, and they're out there somewhere, is ChatGPT or Gemini AI, those deep dive searches, is that a good place to start when I'm doing my homework trying to come up with a name? Because this one's going to keep me awake all night.
Yeah. So I tell everybody my sort of poor man's trademark search, and no, it's not foolproof, right? But it's kind of what we talked about at the beginning. Can you get the domain name? Can you get the social media handles? And if you can't get those, you certainly don't need to pay an attorney like me to do your trademark search. If you're playing around with it and you're like, well, we've got to add the, or we've got to add a dash, or we've got to add the number 2, or we've got to spell it some kind of funny way because it's not actually available because somebody else is already using it, we're never going to get the trademark for that.
Understood. But as a marketer, I'm very aware that there's plenty of people out there buying up good names, especially domain names, just for the sake of having them and selling them to someone who wants that name. And it's technically available because they'll sell it to me, but it's for some astronomical fee. So does that mean I should really stop there? Because that might be the best idea. I might be able to get everything else. Where do I draw the line at in my mind, what's real and what's not?
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't stop there. Like I said, just doing the domain search isn't foolproof. And while I haven't seen one of these cases in a long time, for a while there was kind of a rash of cyber squatting cases where if you had the trademark, you could try to kick somebody off of their domain name. But this is why it's important to actually get a trademark search done and say, okay, can we really go somewhere with this brand? Or are we constantly going to be bumping into 10 competitors that are similar? Are we going to have problems? Are we going to get a nasty cease and desist letter from
Yeah.
somebody? Are there a bunch of other people that maybe haven't registered it, but they're already using it? And so your customers are just going to get confused about who's who. Putting in some of that work on the front end can save you a lot of headache later on when you do start to grow and scale and you're thinking, oh, great, I thought this was my brand. And really it's you and everybody else's.
Right. Well, what about, let's use my example, Sullivan Solutions. When I started this and claimed I claimed the trade name. I did not. I registered the trade name. I did not do an official registration, but my last name's Sullivan. So how wrong can that be? Sullivan Solutions. I got the domain. I've kept it for 30 plus years, and we're good, right? I mean, nobody's come forth and said, I can't use this.
Yeah, I mean, as a practical matter, where I see this come up, so big national corporations, you're going to hear from those guys the minute you start using it or file some sort of registration paperwork, right? We're going to get that cease and desist letter immediately. For the rest of us, where this is going to happen is like my trade show example, where you and your competitor with similar names or branding actually start to bump into each other in your marketing channels. That's the thing that as small business owners makes everybody upset and sends everybody to their lawyers demanding that we send off cease and desist letters. Right. So there are certainly instances where, oh, you've got the same name and so does, a shop over in, Hawaii, and no one cares, right? Nobody's policing it. Nobody's doing anything about it. It's never going to be a problem because you don't sell in Hawaii. They don't ship their products to Ohio, whatever.
Right.
But it does become a problem when you are bumping into each other, or like you're at those trade shows, you're advertising in the same magazines, if people even advertise there anymore, or you're in a situation where you're thinking about franchising. Well, part of a franchise is I'm giving you the right to use this trademark. We should actually have the trademark. Or you've grown your business to such a level and you're thinking, okay, great, I'm ready to sell this business and retire off into the sunset. And the buyers are going, you don't really own the brand of this. This isn't really all that valuable to us.
So just playing devil's advocate a little bit, because we've talked about there's a lot of reasons to go into business, and not everyone has aspirations to being that global brand.
Absolutely.
So where does it make sense? What the thought process is going through it. When I decide I've got a great idea, I'm struggling with maybe getting it patented. I'm struggling with getting it manufactured. I'm struggling with getting it produced. I'm struggling with hiring the right people. Where along the line do I have to do the hard part of now suddenly thinking about the legal aspect of it? Because there are a lot of hurdles out there when you're starting a business, operating a business, even 10, 15 years down the road when something hits and you have to pivot and you find yourself in a different market. That's a lot to ask to think 10 or 15 years down the road where you want to be.
Absolutely. And I'll tell anybody, there are a lot of legal things that as an attorney I'm worried about and I want to help protect you from. But again, I recognize that my clients are startups and small businesses, right? We got to figure out what's most important. And so that's why we might have talked about this before. In every consultation, I go, what are you most worried about? And what are your big picture goals for this business? Because that's going to tell me this is what we need to focus on. And so, yes, if you're trying to build a brand, having that registered and protected is important. We should get to that at some point. But if you are a consultant just starting out, you don't really know what your brand identity is yet, you're just trying to make a go of it and see if you can do this full time and not have to go to that corporate job you hate, registering a trademark is not going to be at the top of your list, realistically speaking, right? Like in a perfect world, sure. But just in terms of time and budget, that's not going to be your top priority.
That makes a lot of sense. I think what you can rely on is maybe the knowledge of your industry and your competition, because regardless of what your goals for your business are, you do have to know who you're competing with. And sometimes the competition isn't an exact match or a near match to your product or service. Sometimes they are a complete alternative to the product or service. So understanding the industry and understanding the field you're playing in, that's imperative for any small business. It really is, and that stuff changes over time. In this case, we can use the example that over time might not be registered today. If I wait a year, that might be too long.
Yeah.
So if I'm not really putting all my eggs in a basket, placing all my bets on being that global brand, how long can I afford to wait? And what's really the impact if I do have to change or rename or realign? And I'm gonna maybe answer my own question with that. Those are the kinds of things that comes back to the industry, I think, in the market that you're in. So, but that's a lot to ask.
It is. And this is why I hate to give people that attorney answer of it depends, but it depends on so many of those things, right? Your goals versus somebody else's goals are going to be completely different. I tell people all the time, especially working with startups, we're not going to trademark your logo first. It's going to change. I cannot tell you the number of how often people are like, oh no, I love this logo. It's going to be amazing. And then when I explain to them the trademarks have to be renewed every 10 years. So is this really going to be your logo 10 years from now? Oh, right. Big companies, sure, they can afford to file a trademark registration every time they change the color or the font or whatever.
Right.
You don't want to do that. The number of people that came to me during the pandemic and said, oh, I want to, add, to my trademark registration, all the face masks that everybody was selling.
Yes.
Are you still going to be selling face masks 10 years from now? Is that really important to you? Like, these are places where you could save some money. But on the flip side, if you're telling me, hey, this brand has been great, I really do, it's taken off, and now I want to get it registered, now we got to flip it back to you. Okay, so we're not going to be able to get that trademark registered. What's it going to cost for them to rebrand the company and explain it to consumers in their target market and change up the logo and change the marketing materials, maybe change the signage if it's a storefront or a restaurant? How expensive is that going to be? So it's a juggling act. And it's one that, everybody's got to decide for themselves, where in my timeline and budget does that fit?
Well, those kinds of decisions do come into play, whether you're trying to get, and they come into play a lot more often than you think they would. The cost of changing a logo or changing your brand, and I'm not one to throw out change for change's sake, but you do have to ask yourself, is it really doing what I think I'm doing? Because there's an awful lot of people who are very emotionally tied to their brands and their logos.
Absolutely.
But are they really as meaningful or as recognizable as they think they are? So that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. I think as small business owners, this thing that we're building, it's our baby, right? We want to protect it. We take a lot of pride and ownership in it. And it hurts a little bit for somebody to come and tell you, it's like, yeah, but 20 other people are doing something very similar. You're not that special, right?
Well, I think it may help to think of some of these things as iterations or as the business grows also. Because something that fit 10 years ago might not fit as well now.
Exactly.
And does it really make sense to spend money on locking yourself into something? Maybe you give yourself permission to rethink it down the road. You mentioned, going through the pandemic and the masks, and that taught a lot of us about pivoting and changing. And the business, for a lot of people, business didn't look the same once we went through that.
No, absolutely. And that's why I think, working with smaller businesses, the focus has to be on, like, what are the core brands, right?
Mm-hmm.
For example, Nike's a trademark, their swoosh symbol's a trademark, their slogan, just do it, is another trademark. Well, sitting here today, that trademark application is $350 for each one of those. times however many goods or services we put on the application.
Right.
So if you're a small business and you're just starting out, are all three of those sitting here on day one important to you? Are they going to be important to you 10 years from now? Or do we need to start with, okay, this is the core piece that's not going to change. And then as time and budget permits, as the company grows, yeah, we can add on the slogan. Oh, okay,
Right.
yeah, this logo is really sticking around and starting to resonate. Let's add that piece. It doesn't have to be the sort of all or nothing approach, but it does, I think, need to be in the back of your mind. Because like I said, when you're just starting, your new
Right.
job is marketing.
How much does geography come into it? Because, you know, we've all heard the horror stories, and I'm not going to name names here in Central Ohio because I don't know all the details, but you know, you hear these things. You're going along. You've got your name. You've got your brand. You're established, and maybe you've been in business 10 years. Well, suddenly, one of the big corporates decides to move in. Usually, a franchise kind of deal, or suddenly they expand their territory and bring in 1 or 10. What if those are the kinds of, they come in after the fact, but they've already got it they've already got it locked in, certified, registered, the whole 9 yards, and I've been here minding my business. Am I good, or can they come in and cause problems for me?
So that's a complicated question. The short answer before I bore anybody to tears is you don't have deep enough pockets to fight that battle. That's probably the most practical answer I could give.
Okay.
The more attorney answer is technically trademark rights are based on first to use. So if you can prove that you were using it first, you technically still have the right to continue using it in the same geographic area that you've been using it.
All right.
Now, what does that mean in this day and age of the internet and international commerce?
Right.
That's a question for another day. But technically, you do have that right. As I said, though, as a practical matter, you have enough time and money and attorneys to fight that big corporation to prove that.
Well, that's fair.
I give you classic examples, a case we probably all read in law school. Somewhere in the country, there was a mom and pop Burger King shop that had been using the name in their little local mom and pop burger shop, right? And then big national Burger King that we all know and maybe not love, but we all know,
right,
came along. And back in the day, they actually fought out the case. It went through however many layers of courts and appeals, and they ended up winning the case. And it's like the classic example of, yeah, they've got the right to continue using it. Now they can't expand, right? They can't leave their little geographic area, but yeah, they've got the right to continue using that name in their little spot. But a case like that today they would drown you in attorney's fees.
Yeah, I was gonna say it takes a lot of hamburgers to pay for that.
Right.
Well, and over time too, the longer you've been using it, the harder it is to prove when you started.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, I've got that on a floppy disk somewhere. Good luck trying to prove that. So yeah, it just. So I almost want to say, what's the point? Do I just throw in the towel? I'm like, dang, that's hard.
No, I mean, I don't think you can throw in the towel, especially from a marketing standpoint, right? But it also depends on, I think, the kind of business that you're trying to build, right? There are some things where, no, it's probably not worth a trademark. Like before the rules change, almost every attorney's law firm or law office, was basically their name, right?
Right. Yeah.
Law office of Maritza S. Nelson does not warrant a trademark registration by any stretch of the imagination, right? But there are other things where if you're building up that brand, and you would be royally pissed off if somebody else started using something exactly or close to it, confusingly similar, then yeah, we kind of need that trademark registration. There's very little that we can do,
right?
Hardly even get into court without it. If you're planning to franchise at some point, if you're building up a brand and you want to one day sell it, you want to prove that that brand is worth anything, you have to have that trademark registration. If you're solopreneur, local consultant, and you do everything under your own name, okay, maybe it's not that important.
Yeah, that's and actually I think there's several add-ons going down that path of conversation also, but it's really hard to think. I've been in business over 30 years now, and I'm still not willing to think about my quote unquote exit strategy. So if I'm not willing to think about it now, there's it's really hard to think about those things early in the development of the business. But it is true that your brand does build equity. It's the visual representation of the goodwill that you have, and it does give you it in a lot of ways. It's almost like equity in your house. At some level, the condition of the paint, the condition of the exterior, that we've all heard about curb appeal, right? Uh, it all factors into the value one way or the other.
Absolutely.
Or the
Right.
marketability of it. So,
Absolutely. And I think there are certain industries where it's just natural to think about some of this stuff earlier.
mhm.
Your consultants, maybe not so much. If you're doing any sort of restaurant, yeah, absolutely. If you're starting a clothing line, absolutely, right? Those things are all about the brand and brand recognition.
Yeah.
So in those cases, yeah, this is a conversation we want to have very early on. With my consulting clients, I don't hear from them usually until they're putting together some sort of product or digital product. And then it's like, okay, now we're concerned about trademark. But the initial company name, maybe not so much. There's only so many variations of consulting we can come up with.
Right. Although we all argue that it's different. So that's another discussion too. I think is that one of the dividing lines if you're in a product scenario or a consumer oriented product scenario. It sounds like trademarks are going to be really important branding for wherever you're going to go with that. Services, maybe not so much. Have you seen examples of services that are successfully trademarked and necessarily trademarked?
It's a little bit harder to say how necessary they are with services. Usually, where I see it is where there's a client that they're really trying to hone in on a particular maybe tagline is probably the best approach.
Okay.
Where they're really trying to get something to resonate and they want that to be the thing that's associated with their company. So the popular example I usually think of and tell people is, if I say, "What's in your wallet?" you immediately think of,
Yeah, right.
right?
Capital One.
So that's going to be the thing where it's like, okay, if you're trying to build up something like that and you're putting a lot of time and effort into that campaign, yeah, then that might be worth it, right? But again, if you're just local mom and pop and you mention it, but you and your 10 YouTube followers,
Right.
and you're not really planning to grow it and do something with it, maybe it's not worth the time and money.
That's actually where I see smaller businesses being the most wishy-washy, if I can use that word.
Yeah.
Taglines tend to change a lot.
Yeah.
Because they aren't just a product mark. It goes the next step. It's words that wrap around that brand or represent that brand, or maybe cause you to think a certain thing or a certain way. But every CMO that comes in is going to trash the last trademark and bring in their own. Frankly, every CEO does. So it's hugely subjective, not to mention the fact that over time, what you think is a really clever tagline, maybe the meaning changes. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but so far, just do it with Nike maybe hasn't changed, although I would argue in some markets it probably has. But
yeah, and that gets back to, what are you putting your time and money and resources into, right? Do you want to protect that branding, that slogan, even if it's only for the next 10 years? right? Or the next 5 years. Is that important enough to you, right? Or is it, no, I don't really want to. Other examples where I'll sometimes tell clients like, yeah, maybe we do want to use the tagline is because their name, so whether it's the business or the core product name, is so common or so similar to a bunch of other things that have already been registered, that I'll say, okay, for the purpose of making this more distinguishable, let's tack the tagline onto it.
Okay.
Right. So sometimes something like that can help if they're really bound and determined to get that trademark registration and build up that brand identity. But, super cold ice cream is like, okay, well, we're never going to get that trademark. So what else you got?
Right. Well, again, that comes back. And I think most founders anymore are a lot more sophisticated than they were 20, 30 years ago. We're much more brand aware. So I think I would argue audiences are a lot more, markets are a lot more sophisticated now about brand. They expect a brand. They expect you to be unique. They expect you to be aggressive with the brand. And I would also argue that your employees do as well. So this isn't a conversation about maybe you shouldn't trademark it or you shouldn't take it seriously. This is about being educated and making a well-informed decision.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of that is probably triggered by the internet, right? And everybody's trying to go viral. We've got to deal with, all the social media,
Right.
YouTube and podcasting, and which platform is going to be important. Right. So you have to take all that into consideration. But it's interesting that you mentioned the uniqueness, because I find that so many people seem to be afraid to be unique. They almost want to latch on to something. It's just like, oh no, people will immediately know what I'm talking about if I say this. But if I'm too unique and then I put myself out there, I'm going to have to, find that magical thing that makes me go viral, or I'm going to have to spend a lot on marketing to help people understand it.
Well, I don't think anybody's figured out how to absolutely make anything go viral. But you do have to be unique. You have to find a way to be unique. Otherwise, you're granulated sugar or your corn, and even then, a lot of the larger producers do start to differentiate at some level because people want to feel good about their purchase. So finding a way to be unique, whether it's your name or your tagline, your brand, your logo, there's a lot of ways to do that. And a lot of times it's a combination of things. It may be a combination of your mission, your values.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's another thing that consumers, especially, are actually consumers at every level, I think are a lot more aware of the values that you represent with your brand and your company and how you represent those. So it isn't just that trademarked logo mark or lockup or whatever today's word for that is, but it's all the things that come together and make the company different. And a lot of times that's mostly things that you can't trademark. Those are only things you can live.
Yeah, you're probably not going to trademark, mission and value statements. Like I said, we can do names, we can do slogans,
Right.
we can do logos. But yeah, some of that you really just have to put out there and embrace it and be willing to just kind of walk into that and, do what, like you said, do what it is that makes you unique and not the same as everybody else. Do
Right.
you want to be that taco truck down the street, or do you want to be, hey, this brand, I want to go to that place?
Yeah. It's very easy to fight against limiting your company or limiting yourself. A target audience, a target market,
Right.
a focus, a niche. I just want to make money. I just have to eat. So I don't want to worry about that. I don't want to worry about how many hundreds or thousands of dollars it's going to cost me to trademark that logo. I just want to I just want to do my job.
Yeah, but like, I'm not the marketing person, but I've been doing this long enough to know that if your sole goal for launching your business is you just want to eat, you're not going to be in business for very long. I mean, we all have competitors out there, right?
We do.
Like, I hate to say, you're a dime a dozen, but there are other consultants, there are other lawyers, there are other, fill in the blank service provider or whatever restaurant, there has to be something more to it, driving that passion and that separates you. Like, why do I want to come to you for marketing services instead of XYZ?
I think the answer to that is one that we keep coming back to, and it's honestly the foundation for why we have these conversations, because they are conversations. They're conversations to have with your tribe, your people, the people that get you, the people that understand, people that can give you the good information. And they are out there. It's not, it may not be the highly branded, highly visible lawyers, certainly not ChatGPT. It may not be the marketing agency. It may not be the franchised HR company or benefits or whatever else it is that you need for your company. But that's the true value of networking and having the conversations and finding the people that can give you the good, honest advice. And I'll drink to that any day.
Absolutely. Finding your tribe.